Hello, friends. It's Charles here again, and thanks for joining me for another episode of Empowered. Today's show is entitled CEOs Don't Let Fear and Paranoia Sink Your Leadership. We're going to be having a look at a book today through the recent article published by the writer. He was CEO of Prologis from 2008 until 2012. He is the author of the recently published book called Transfluence: How to Lead with Transformative Influence in Today's Climate of Change. His name is Walter Rockowicz. As executives rise to power, they are apt to become arrogant. They also, perhaps surprisingly, tend to become more fearful. They hate the idea that they might appear to be vulnerable or incompetent, and they get paranoid about themselves and colleagues around them. This arrogance and the underlying fear makes them less effective. The author shares a story from his own career to illustrate this point, a time when he felt frozen about what to do and foolish for feeling that way. To his surprise, when he was honest about his confusion with colleagues, they came to his aid. 3 steps can help executives manage the tendencies towards arrogance and fearfulness: getting out of C-suite, trusting colleagues more than they're inclined to, and thirdly, giving people enough attention. For decades, we've told CEOs to be humble. It's fine to be confident, even fiercely determined, we'd say, but arrogance will bring you down. The ideal leader respects and listens to colleagues, communicates honestly, adjusts opinions when confronted with new evidence, and makes decisions that strengthen the organization rather than his or her own position. The problem is that everything else in the corporate life pushes CEOs in the opposite direction. To rise in the organization, executives have to focus relentlessly on themselves. If they win the tournament, they gain the power and the prestige that isolates them. Arrogance is almost inevitable, as is somewhat paradoxically paranoia. When consultant Roger Jones interviewed dozens of CEOs and other senior executives, he kept seeing the same 5 deep-seated fears. They're worried about appearing to be incompetent, vulnerable, and foolish. They're worried about underachieving, and they feared political attacks from their colleagues. None of these top-of-mind fears involved the businesses or organizations that they led. The leaders were caught up in themselves, and the fears were limiting their effectiveness. Jones's findings struck me powerfully because of a difficult experience I had more than a decade ago. I had been a rising manager at Prologis, a fast-growing industrial real estate company in the S&P 500. In 2004, I became the chief operating officer, working very closely with the CEO. Over time, however, we disagreed about the pace of growth, and I quit early in 2008. Then the financial crisis hit the company hard. The CEO resigned, and the board asked me in November to come back and to take his place. Soon after settling in, our already weak financial position declined even further. Matters came to a head during a long evening meeting with the CFO and his staff. Bankruptcy seemed inevitable, but I couldn't stomach the thought of giving up on the company that I had helped build. Everyone was looking for me for a decision, but I excused myself to walk around and clear my head. Actually, my head was spinning. I managed to grab a chair in another room before fainting. I quickly regained consciousness and returned to the meeting, but I still had no idea of what to say. All I could manage was, "I don't know what to do, and I need your help." It was my worst nightmare. I felt incompetent, vulnerable, and foolish. Sound familiar? But then a remarkable thing happened. After a stunned silence, the CFO and other colleagues essentially said, "We're with you, and we'll figure it out." Somehow we did, thanks to a lot of diligence, creative thinking, and luck. We bought enough time with creditors to sell some assets at a decent price and pay down debt. Once we stabilized, we went to work correcting the problems that the growth years had masked. In particular, a culture of deep distrust. My willingness to say that I didn't know what to do at a key moment actually reduced people's insecurities and reset expectations. It also liberated me from my own fears, at least for a while. Over the next 4 years, we rebuilt the company to its former heights and more. Not everything went smoothly. We laid off almost a third of our workforce, which was painful in itself as it slowed down the process of developing trust. But when I retired in 2013, Prologis was solidly profitable and the largest company worldwide in its industry. I don't recommend my 2008 ordeal to anyone. If I hadn't built up credibility with other executives in previous years, my vulnerability might well have blown up in my face. But I do think that CEOs and other senior executives can and should take steps to reduce arrogance and its underlying partner, fear. The key is to reset workplace emotions through microclimates, settings that are free of the pervasive ego-expanding and ego-threatening effects of the job. Here are 3 steps I recommend to keep the focus off yourself. The first is to get out of the C-suite. I don't mean traveling, which usually reinforces your exalted status. I made a point of having lunch with a non-executive employee at least once a week. Sometimes we talked about their role in the company, but mostly we chatted about our families, weekend plans, and other pleasures. Neuroscientists have found that we can reduce our fears simply by talking to others, and non-executive employees won't stimulate paranoia. The second is to trust your colleagues more than you think is wise. Too often, what you think is wisdom is really just arrogance and fear talking. In most cases that I intentionally chose to trust a colleague, it was the right decision. I got burnt a few times, admittedly, but the goodwill I generated with this approach more than compensated for the occasional short-term damage. The third is to give people the attention they deserve. It's a gift that also builds goodwill and rarely backfires. Not only does it pay off over time with easier conversations later if things get stressful, but it subtly changes your frame of reference. Most executives are quick to give their own opinions, putting subordinates who think differently in a vulnerable position. I forced myself to listen before I chimed in. That helped stimulate a wider range of ideas, which put us in a better position to succeed, and it kept the attention off of me. CEOs have lots of ways to improve their performance, from hiring coaches to changing strategies, but the most important might be emotional. Using disciplined practices to overcome the fears and the arrogance that dampens their effectiveness. Well, that's all for today, folks. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Empowered. If you have found it useful, please give us a like and consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell, as this really helps our channel. Please join us again tonight. We'll be streaming to YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter for your convenience. Tonight at 2000 hours will be catch-up. In this session, we'll be rebroadcasting one of our episodes of Focus Forward with Chris Van Smith. It's entitled The Art of Conflict Resolution in the Context of VUCA. The VUCA acronym unpacks as follows. V is for volatility to vision, U, uncertainty to understanding, C, complexity to clarity, and the A stands for ambiguity to agility. Well, that's all for now, folks. Thank you very much, and goodbye.